Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our virtual chat brought to you by American Center Thailand. I'm Gulshan, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Sandy Jacobs. Hi, Sandy.
Hi, Gulshan. How are you?
Good, thank you, and thanks so much for doing this for us today.
I'm glad to be here. This is great. I'm very excited.
We too. So, Sandy Jacobs is a U.S. Foreign Service officer currently serving as a deputy of Embassy Tashkent's political economic section. She previously served in Mumbai, Dushanbe, Tallinn, and most recently in Washington, D.C. Sandy is interested in space exploration. Sandy's interest in space exploration goes back to her childhood in Florida, but she rediscovered the wonder of space in the last few years with her own children. And today, Sandy will share with us information about space education in the United States and other space-related topics, including today's landing of the Mars Perseverance Rover. And as usual, we would like to make this program as interactive as possible. So, friends, please don't hesitate to put your questions. If you have questions about NASA's international cooperation efforts, plans for Mars exploration, and anything else, put your questions right here below this video, both on YouTube and Facebook. Happy to get back to your questions after the presentation. Sandy, thanks so much. And we're very excited that we'll hear about space today. And I'm giving it over to you.
Great. Thank you again, Gulshan. It's really great to be here. Let's see. Are you going to pull the presentation up? Let's see. There we go. All right. Yeah, it's really great to be here today. Thank you to everyone who is listening and who will be listening in the future. I thought that today's Chai Chat made a lot of sense to talk about space, whether it's education or exploration, because we had a really exciting development happen about 2 o'clock in the morning Tashkent time. The Mars 2020 Perseverance Rover landed safely on Mars. That was not a guarantee. It's a very difficult process, and a lot of people were holding their breath. So I have a few fun videos that I'm going to share with you about that during the presentation. But before I do that, I just wanted to give you a little overview of who I am and why I'm talking about space, because as Gulshan said, I'm a diplomat by trade. I'm not a scientist. I actually wasn't that good at math when I was a kid, to be honest. But space is something that growing up in the state of Florida, where I'm from, most kids, if not all kids, were always aware when the space shuttle launches were going to happen. And I was especially lucky because my mother actually worked at the Department of Education, and for a few years, right as we had a program called the Teacher in Space program, where they did a nationwide search to look for a teacher to launch into space, and she actually managed that program for the state of Florida. So there's a sad ending and a happy ending to the story. The very sad ending, which actually was a national tragedy, was that particular space shuttle. The teacher's name was Krista McAuliffe, but it was the Challenger, which was the only shuttle we ever lost on launch. And so it was a very impactful moment, I think, in most American kids' lives who are about my age, but especially for those of us in Florida. But on the positive side, we became close with many of the other teachers who were runners-up, and one actually became a good family friend and gave me my first telescope and took my family out to watch Halley's Comet, which is this comet that circles the Earth every 70 or 80 years or so. So I had a lot of kind of early formative experience. And then frankly, I forgot about space. It wasn't something I was really paying attention to for a long time. But when my own children started kindergarten, my oldest, she went to a school in Arlington, Virginia that was designated as a NASA Explorer School. And I still remember in kindergarten, they had something called STEM night, where they have different activities, hands-on activities for kids. And I met this teacher named Dr. Sullivan, who was conducting kind of hands-on activities, teaching kids what it would be like to operate the machinery on the International Space Station. And so I kind of reopened my eyes about space, and have since then had a lot of engagement both with my own family, but then also professionally. And I think it's just a really fun topic. So a couple other things just to share about me before I actually get into space in a little more detail is I love to hike. So I'm very excited. Last weekend, I made it up into the mountains in Uzbekistan for the first time. And I'm really looking forward to having some good adventures here in Uzbekistan. I can also say that my favorite job that I've ever had was right across the border. There's a picture there from Tajikistan when I spent 2 years working with students and teachers and members of civil society on a whole variety of exchange programs and other small projects. So I was very excited. My whole family was excited to return back to Central Asia for this particular trip. So that's just a little bit about me. And then let's see here. Still learning that. Okay, so I wanted to talk about space education in particular because it's something that I have seen as on a very personal level be important. And I think for a variety of reasons. So why is space education important? It's you think about space, and there's a very famous quote by our president, John F. Kennedy, who says, we're going to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. So kids when they are in, especially their formative years, but really throughout, they see these really crazy, complicated things that folks have decided to do in time. You know, you think about Sputnik and how that changed the shape of space exploration, and then Apollo 11, when we did decide to go to the moon. And that wasn't just the United States. I think there were 80 different countries more than 80 countries that were participating in some aspect or another in contributing to that mission. So, kids see that you have an idea, let's go to Mars, and then they actually watch the steps and processes that it takes to get there. The other thing that's cool about space, I think, is, we talk a lot about STEAM education or STEM education, depending on whether you put the arts into science, technology, and engineering and math. Sometimes arts is in there and sometimes it's not. But space is something that encompasses all of these things. So no matter what you think about in terms of whether it's, building the rockets themselves or making the calculations, the design of the machinery, what those different instruments are going to do, all of those pieces matter, and the technology that goes into the communications. So space is an area in terms of academics that can really encompass all of those things. The other thing that's really great about space, and I'll show you some examples later on, but it gives kids a chance to do things that are hands-on. So there's a lot of activities that kids can do with experiments in the classroom or outside of the classroom, with just everyday things that don't cost extra money, that are laying around your house or available in the school. So you don't need to have, expensive kits. You can have a board and, a toy car, and experiment with velocity of how a rover would be, going down the slope. So there's an endless array of experiments and activities that kids can do. And this next one is actually very personal for me. It reaches kids who are not traditional learners. So this is a picture of my son, Oliver, who is the biggest space geek I know. I like to think I'm a close second, but really he's been my inspiration behind all of this. But Oliver is not school is not his favorite thing. I'm like, to be honest, I always, tell kids study hard, do all these things. But for Oliver, he's not a traditional learner. He doesn't necessarily enjoy everyday aspects of school. So for him, when he went to that Discovery Lab at his NASA Explorer School, that was his favorite part of the week. He was able to do things and to think about topics that he didn't normally get to think about in school. And, it started, I put this particular National Geographic cover up here because I still remember when we were living in Estonia, coming home one day and saying, Oliver, look. And I showed him the picture that the New Horizons mission had taken of Pluto. And it was the first time that we had ever gotten a clear picture of Pluto. And I showed it to him and he got really excited about it. And then we started following the New Horizons mission. And then 2 years later, I think it was, when New Horizons on New Year's Eve, Novi God, was going to make its flyby of this Kuiper Belt object, which I had never heard of before, and he had never heard of before, but NASA had decided to name it Ultima Thule. And we, for the first time, realized there was something called NASA TV, and we sat down together and watched it like we would watch a sporting event. And there was a press conference, and we saw all the engineers getting excited when they finally got feedback. And it really, for him, it was something, because he had followed it all along, it showed him that there was something that he could set a goal, and that there were these folks that were out there who didn't necessarily, love doing traditional, worksheets in school or kind of subjects that you would think of for elementary school, but that they might be able to think about bigger topics and solve bigger problems. So I think that space education is an area that you can really reach kids that wouldn't otherwise be interested in school. And then I think we already talked a little bit about this last one, but yeah, space exploration is hard. So the kids, when they see these things and they watch what goes into these various missions, it teaches them that they have long-term destinations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my next slide. So this is, I think, the best example, both for NASA and for the United States and all the other partner nations that worked on the Mars Perseverance Rover, which landed, I think it was 1:55 a.m. this morning, Tashkent time. So we did set our alarms, and we're a little tired today because we were up to watch NASA TV so we could see it live. But this particular rover is where, as a family, but also professionally, I found out that NASA has all of these programs, not just for schools, but also for individual kids. So this isn't the first time they've done this. It was the first time I was really tracking it. Oliver, who really loves space, decided that he wanted to enter this Name the Rover competition. So NASA partnered with another, like an NGO. It was an education-focused NGO to run a contest, and kids, I think it was 150 words. It wasn't very long. They had 150 words, or maybe 200. But to say why, to pick a name for the next rover, which eventually became the Perseverance. So they picked a name for the rover, but then they also had to write an essay about why they thought that name mattered. And going back to my son, this was something that for him was really hard because he doesn't really like to write, but he loves space. So every day for 2 weeks, he came back and he worked on this essay, and he gave it a lot of thought, what he wanted to call it, why he wanted to call it. And I've never seen him work so hard on any given project, at least up until that point in time. So he entered the contest. He wanted to name it the Endurance after Ernest Shackleton's ship that famously was crushed by the ice in Antarctica. And his reasoning was that Antarctica had a very similar kind of difficult environment to Mars, and it was very hard, and you had all these explorers. And he had this idea that we should give endurance as a ship, we should give it a second opportunity for success, but this time on Mars. So that was his idea. And we were very excited when we found out of all these kids, he was one of 3 kids in the state of Virginia to make the semifinals. And then we were completely overwhelmed when we found out he was one of 9 finalists for the program. So he came really close, actually, to naming the rover. And in fact, many of his friends were calling it the Endurance, but the final name was actually the Perseverance, which was a name given to it by a 7th grader in Virginia. So really talking about inspiring kids across the country could see that. So I have a couple of videos I'm going to show you and tell you a little bit more about the name, but then also to show you the launch and the landing. But I want to just show you a short video, and you'll hear the voice that you hear is actually Alex Mather, who's the 7th grader who named the Mars rover. So here, let me just.
We are a species.
Hold on one second. I have to remember the sharing here. So we do share screen and that one. Okay.
We are a species of explorers, believers.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
We are willing to do the hard things, to overcome the many challenges. This is what brings out the best in us.
We go for a mission to the moon.
Our path has led to success and to bitter losses.
We come together today to mourn the loss of 7 brave Americans.
Yet, even when faced with tragedy and setbacks, we persevere. We keep striving. We keep believing. From space, we see our planet as a whole. We see the challenges facing it, and we face those challenges together. We will not give up. We challenge convention. We refuse to accept the status quo. The time at hand is hard, but we will persevere. We can still draw hope from the moon and the stars, from space, from exploration. There is a new day beyond the challenges we face now.
Curiosity, insight, spirit, opportunity. If you think about it, all of these names of past Mars rovers are qualities we possess as humans.
10, 9, we have ignition sequence start.
But if rovers are to be the qualities of us as a race, we missed the most important thing.
3, 2,
Perseverance.
launch commence. Liftoff. We have liftoff.
We are a species. Always persevere.
Nothing can be taken for granted when you get to Mars. There's a lot of things we just don't know.
Space always has a way of throwing us curveballs and surprising us.
I mean, until we get the data that says we're on the ground safely,
Sorry about that. Hold on. Okay. I think everyone can, Gulshan, can people still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sandy.
Okay, I want to make sure.
You're going to share another video? Do you want to share a PowerPoint?
I will, but just here, I'll do this. Okay, we'll share this in just a minute. So that was how the rover was. Yeah, I think it's the PowerPoint first. So that was how the rover was named. So the exciting thing, though, like I said, is there's this personal connection. So all these kids that entered this contest all feel like they're a part of it. And around the United States, and actually around the world, people voted for the final 9. There were almost, I think it was over 770,000 people voted, including from Central Asia, on what they thought the best name would be. So you see that, and these kids now are invested, right? They know that this is something that they want to be a part of. And then you go from that, and then see, takes 7 months to get to Mars. So yes, July 20th, we actually had the launch of the Perseverance. So this one I think is only, it's a little shorter, but I would like to just show you what the launch itself looked like. So let's see, we have launches. So NASA creates for every mission they do. NASA will create what's called a kind of media pack, or not media, like an education package now. So you can sign on to a mission, and teachers and students and parents and any other just interested people can kind of sign on and watch it, and we get updates and telling us when to participate. So this was the launch itself.
Let's light this candle. 10, 9,
8,
7, 6, 5,
4,
3,
2,
1.
0, and liftoff as the countdown to Mars continues.
Black off. Listo.
The perseverance of humanity is launching the next generation of robotic explorers to the Red Planet.
Bon voyage.
Diplomat Perseverance.
Mars Perseverance.
Okay, so that was the actual launch itself, which was a very exciting time for, like I said, the kids that had participated. It was also a little bittersweet because at this point COVID had happened, and a lot of people, us included, who were planning to actually go to Cape Canaveral in Florida, which is where all of the human and actually all of the launches, not all, but most of the launches, and certainly all of the large launches to space from the continental United States all go from Cape Canaveral in Florida. And we were supposed to be there in person, but because of COVID, it was a much, much smaller group, but it took NASA a lot of extra work and effort, and they called it Perseverance Air. They actually had to do a private plane going back and forth from where the rover is built in California all the way across the United States to Florida. So there was a huge amount of extra work and determination that went in, but the people at NASA knew that if they didn't launch on, I think it was by July 22nd, it was going to be another 18 months before, you can see on the chart here, the way that the rotations work of the Earth and Mars with orbits, it was going to be another 18 months before they had another launch window. So they were very determined, were very cautious and safe in terms of the precautions that they took, but they were able to actually make it launch, to make that launch window. So last video for you for Perseverance. So what happened last night? I think that the way that they land these rovers is kind of crazy. There's something called a sky crane that actually drops the rover itself down onto the ground. First, there's like some jets that slow it down, and then they actually drop it down via the sky crane. But before that, you've got what we call the 7 minutes of terror, where there's no real communication, so you don't know whether it's burning up in the atmosphere or whether it's okay. So it's always a very nerve-wracking time which results in, for successful landings, a bunch of really geeky science people jumping up and down and cheering. So let's just watch that so we can see the last piece on Perseverance. Let's see. You got here, share screen. Got that one. And it's another short one.
We are starting the straighten up and fly right maneuver in preparation for parachute deploy. The navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed and we are seeing significant deceleration. Skycam maneuver has started. About 20 meters off the surface.
We're getting signals from MRO.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the sands of past life.
Looks like we're getting the first image.
This is the most amazing thing. This is what NASA does. This is what we can do as a country.
Okay, so the question is, why are we sending this rover to Mars? So Perseverance, the main goal, it landed in Jezero crater, which is actually named after a town in Bosnia, of all places. They've got a very unique relationship there. So there's been a lot of excitement in Bosnia about this particular Mars rover. But the Perseverance is going to be exploring Jezero crater, which almost 4 billion years ago we think was the site of a lake. So this rover is going to be looking for microfossils that would, for the first time ever, the plan is to actually bring those fossils back to Earth, which is very exciting. It's also going to be looking for signs of life and a couple of other very unique firsts about this particular rover. It's the first time we will actually be recording what it sounds like on Mars. Now, I suspect it's not going to sound that exciting because, I mean, it's a big empty planet. But I think the concept that we can actually, from Earth, hear what's going on in Mars is very exciting to me. The other thing that is unique about this particular rover is it has brought up with it a drone helicopter. And they actually named the drone helicopter after one of the other names in the final group of 9 kids. There was a girl in Mississippi who was Indian American. So there's a lot of a really great kind of immigration story there. And she wanted to call the rover Ingenuity and didn't get to name the rover itself, but I think NASA liked the name so much that they decided they would call this helicopter, first helicopter on Mars, the Ingenuity. So that's where the name came from. And my son did say that he thought that Endurance would be a terrible name for a helicopter on Mars because there's no way it's going to last that long because they're flying it, you know, remotely from Earth to Mars. This is not a long-lasting helicopter. I think NASA said they are very hopeful they'll get 4 flights out of it. So a lot of work that went into it. But in speaking to one of the Mars rover drivers, he said everyone at JPL Laboratories, where they control the rovers, they build and they control the rovers, they're all hoping, the Mars rovers, that they get to be the one that actually flies the helicopter because it's really revolutionary. But I think the main thing, though, is that thinking about this in terms of a global achievement, our new president of the United States, Joe Biden, said today that today once again proves that with the power of science and ingenuity, nothing is beyond the realm of possibility. And I think that's what projects like this do. And I think NASA has a goal of sending people to Mars. And there's a timeline and a plan for that starts with the Artemis missions, sending and setting up a base on the moon first to kind of get experience and practice there. And then I did see there was a question from Davron Akramov in the chat asking about space sciences in Uzbekistan. And I know that there's a new space agency here, Uzcosmos, and there's some initial conversations happening between them and SpaceX, which is the most famous private company. There are several private companies in the United States that are focused on space exploration, but SpaceX is the most famous. And I think there's been some new conversations there. And SpaceX not only wants to send people to Mars for a mission, they have every intention of sending people to colonize. That's actually one of the primary reason the company was founded. So I think there's a lot of excitement within the engagement of private companies because it allows for a little bit more flexibility in terms of working with other national space programs around the world. So there's that. And then let's see here. Let me go back to my screen sharing. And we'll go there. Okay, so this is just, I don't know how many folks out there are teachers or students, but really it applies for parents. It applies for everyone. But the message I want to say is we're really lucky that our kids had the opportunity to go to this NASA Explorer School. This is actually the teacher here who did Dr. Sullivan. She was the teacher at the Discovery Lab, and there's my son Oliver in the picture, and he's actually doing his interview to defend his name for the Mars rover there. And that's the Discovery Lab at his school, which was just chock full of resources. But most schools don't have that, even in the United States. But what teachers and students do have is access to an incredible amount of custom free resources that are out there. And I put a few examples here, and I'm just gonna take you through, we don't have to look at all of them, but just, let's see. Here we go. So you can see here, this is the NASA page for what we call STEM engagement. And up at the top, there's a whole series of engagements. So you can see all of the different missions that they do. There's links to NASA TV, which always has fun and exciting, well, I think they're exciting programs. And the good news about space is it moves slowly. So if, for instance, you're going to watch a spacewalk from the International Space Station, they will broadcast these live, and they take 6 or so hours, and the astronauts are speaking very slowly. So if you have non-native English speakers or people that have interest in science but are also trying to learn English, having NASA TV on is actually a really great way to do that. But within that, you can see here, there's this topic, browsing topics for students and also for educators. And Gulshan, can you see when I'm hovering the different the different options there?
Yes, Cindy, we can see it.
That's excellent. Okay, great. So you can see here, there's these contests and challenges. Those are things like the Mars rover, the Name the Rover contest, but they always have, I think I saw one the other day that was designing a space toilet. So imagine all of the little, second grade boys and girls out there giggling about designing their own space toilet for a rocket ship, and other such, different challenges that go all the way up through the university level. And then you have here, they break it down by different grade levels and in formal education. But this is the thing that's really great, I think, for teachers, is they actually have lesson plans that are there. So if you did decide that you wanted to do a lesson on space, there's a whole series of things. Some of them are historical, like celebrating the Apollo missions, which includes all of the missions that the United States sent to the moon were a part of the Apollo mission series. But then also items for younger kids, like using spaghetti to engineer a structure and have the greatest load. And then they can practice, students can practice and think about different principles of science and engineering through using, spaghetti. So this is something that teachers can certainly have access to these materials without having, a great deal of need for additional activities. So there's things like an engineering design challenge. That would be something that would be great for older students. So, and then the same applies for students. You've got these, different opportunities, whether it's video games, things like that. And then also, what's the other thing I wanted to highlight? There's just so many cool things. Anyway, I highly encourage you to explore this, because I think, careers. So you can look at all the different careers that are out there, which is a really great way to get kids engaged, is to talk to them. So there are other resources that are there. I think this presentation will be shared later, so I'm not necessarily going to go through all of them, because I have a couple more slides I wanted to share. Just going back, because like I said, this is a very personal presentation for me. So one other thing that I would say for us probably was the thing that got our family the most excited is when our son decided he was really excited about space. We decided as a family that we would give him a surprise 2 nights at this place called Space Camp. So in Huntsville, Alabama, where if you look here on the map, you've got Washington, D.C. here. And so it's about a 2-hour flight in the American South. I'm from Florida, which is down here, and the capital city of Tallahassee. So not too far from Huntsville. But this is the place that built, in Huntsville, they built all of the Saturn V rockets, which is, as far as I know, still the largest rocket that's ever been launched into space. I would say the Soyuz rocket has had a lot more staying power, which is impressive. But they have had at this site this educational overnight camp called Space Camp that kids can go. And because our kids were younger, we actually went as a family. And you can do everything from spacewalk. They do like a simulated spacewalk. They will teach kids how to build model rockets. Here, this is just kind of enjoying sitting on a rover, but some really kind of fun and exciting ways for kids to really have, going back to kids that don't necessarily work well in a traditional classroom setting, have some hands-on opportunities. So this is actually a mock-up of the International Space Station that they have there, and the kids can practice how they would work the robotic arm if they were trying to repair something on the outside of the ISS. And then they have something called the 1/6 gravity chair. So kids can actually, and adults did it as well. You can see there's a man here, but they can feel what the gravity feels like to walk on the moon. And they've got kind of a lunar surface that's been built. And then what I think was the most fun and exciting is they actually have missions that the kids can participate in. So you do one where you're actually in mission control, and another one where you're in the spaceship, or we were in the space shuttle, which doesn't fly anymore. So it was a little bit outdated. And we had a little bit of fun making fun of that. But my son was the commander, my husband was the pilot, and we actually executed a mission. Something went wrong. We had to fix it. It was all very exciting. So anyway, that was I think a way to, for him, that was what got him truly excited. Now, I know not everybody has the opportunity to do something like that and travel to the United States just for that. But what I would say is there are a lot of these online resources that you can create similar missions and just not necessarily have a mock-up of the Soyuz, or you could even let the kids build that. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to enjoy it. So finally, and then I'll open it up for questions. I was thinking last night about what are some movies that we enjoy about space, but that are also really good in terms of encouraging education, but also great English practice. So a few of the ones that came to mind for me, this movie Space Camp, which is old and a little bit silly, but it actually depicts a group of kids in the 1980s that go to space camp, and they accidentally get launched into space and have to figure out how to work as a team and get back to Earth. So it's a pretty cheesy movie, but was a fun movie to show the kids before we actually went. One of our favorite movies is The Martian, which is about a man who was actually left behind on Mars in the middle of a sandstorm and has to figure out how to survive and then how to actually link up with the ship that's coming back to rescue him. So there's a lot of problem solving and science involved. And once again, because he's by himself for a lot of the movie, is a great movie for English learners. October Sky is one that I think is great if you've got this science. I don't know if you still do the science Olympiads here, but we have something similar in the United States called the Science Fair. And this tells the story of a very poor student in West Virginia in coal mining country, which is, I would say, think of that as like Eastern Ukraine, a very economically depressed area where most of the people are working in the coal industry. So there's not a lot of educational opportunities at that point in time when the movie was filmed. And this kid was getting himself into trouble, and he had a science teacher that said, you know what, you should, instead of blowing up, whatever else you're blowing up, why don't you try building rockets? So he started building bigger and bigger rockets and getting interested in the aerodynamics of rockets, and ended up growing up and working at NASA. And it's his name is Homer Hickam, and it's a great story. But he first goes to the science fair, wins the science fair, and it's a true story. And that actually gives him a scholarship to go to university. So space for him was kind of his ticket out of working in the coal mines for the rest of his life. And then Star Trek, I think, and 2001 Space Odyssey are both just old classic. Star Trek is a series, but once again, the language is very slow. And so I think is a great kind of classic space exploration, a little more sci-fi, definitely more sci-fi. And same with 2001 Space Odyssey. And then the last movie I think is one that is gained a lot of interest in recent years, is looking back and understanding who the contributors were to the original space race that we had in the United States, and the Apollo program, and even the Mercury program before Apollo, that there was this group of people, and in the case of NASA, there was a large pool of, they were called computers. Before real computers, they had women, most of whom were African American, who were called computers, and they did the math. And these were a group of brilliant women who, once again, it's a true story. There's a wonderful book and also a book that's been adapted for younger readers. But you learn about a kind of part of history that was forgotten, but that's very important, and it's important to tell that story, I think, and to have kids understand that there was representation even in the beginning. And yeah, so that's kind of my presentation. And Gulshan, I don't know if we want to take questions, or what do you think? What's the best thing to do now?
Yes, let's look at the questions first. And I just want to remind everyone, Please put your questions in the comment section, and this is the best time to start asking your questions. Of course, Sandy, thanks so much for sharing so many interesting resources and for sharing your personal experience with space exploration and your family's adventures, learning about space. And of course, congrats to the Mars 2020 Perseverance team for successful landing. Yeah, it's amazing accomplishment. So we have a question that came to us before actually live started. It's a question from Nadir Sadikov, and he's asking, I think you covered that question a little bit. If you want to add something, is there any collaboration with the US on space programs of Uzbekistan?
Yeah, so I think in Central Asia, the most, I don't know, famous, right word, the deepest cooperation has always been, of course, with Kazakhstan because of Baikonur and the fact that when the United States stopped launching the space shuttle out of Cape Canaveral in Florida, the Soyuz has been the only way until a few months ago. We had a very long gap, and there was no other way to get US astronauts up to the International Space Station. So the Russian space program is running their Soyuz launches out of Baikonur in Kazakhstan. And so the US has maintained very close ties to the Kazakh space program because of that. And actually, I think it's the best example of when two countries don't necessarily get along, Russia and the United States, in most areas on space, we've really always continued to have this cooperation. I think that Cosmos is a newer organization. And what I would say is, if there is interest, we do have a science officer at the embassy. And if that's the type of cooperation that NASA does and that we help to facilitate, that's going back to my real job of what diplomats do. And so I think the question remains, what is the interest in cooperation? And the US is always excited and engaged, I think, on international cooperation.
Thank you. And the next question is, what's America's vision on Space Force? How does the country would like to see this unit in a decade?
So I don't have Space Force, unfortunately, I don't have as much information on because it's a military, it's a military branch as opposed to NASA, which is a civilian agency. And I've worked a fair amount with NASA because during the 50th anniversary of Apollo, I actually organized a bunch of speaker programs and recruited a bunch of folks, but Space Force was not really in existence yet. So I don't have a lot of background on that. What I can tell you, though, is they just hired the first, every different branch of the military has their own designation. There's sailors in the Navy, there's soldiers in the Army. And I think someone must have watched too many space movies because they're called Guardians in Space Force. So the first Guardians were just brought in, and I think it makes me smile to think of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So I don't know. I unfortunately don't have a lot of information on Space Force itself, but I can tell you that it's a new organization within the military, and they're still trying to work through the mission. This is the first time we've had a transfer of presidential administration. So I think it's an interesting space to watch.
Okay, thank you. Shout out from Brianna Claude. Thanks for so many great resources. I didn't set my alarm, but excited to see you guys did. So epic.
Thank you. And Brianna is actually one of our she's a fellow space aficionado at our embassy. So yeah, I have someone else to talk to about all these things, which is good.
Yeah. We have a question from Daniya Hasanova. She's asking, do schools arrange field trips to space museums in the US?
Okay. I think that is dependent on where you are. Once again, different schools in the United States, much like in Uzbekistan, have different resources. So I can guarantee you that the kids in Huntsville, Alabama, have a lot of field trips to the U.S. Space and Rocket Center to see the Saturn V's. And both of my children in Arlington, Virginia, it's very close to Washington, D.C., so they went to see the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, which was very exciting. And so I think when kids have access, because they're close geographically, then that's something they would get to do. But if not, it really is dependent on the school and the science teacher and what the availability is of the individual place.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Interesting question from Emily Schling. Hi, Sandy, long-time friend and listener. I would like to know what top 3 items you would bring to Mars.
That's a tough one, Emily. I have to think about. I haven't thought about questions like that before. I think this is probably, and actually you can see here my, anyway, my screensaver is a picture of Mars, but so ironically, so I would definitely bring my iPhone because you can put everything on there. You could have both music and video, which they say for astronauts that are going to a place like Mars, you really do have to think a lot about the kind of psychological impacts of having all of this time. I mean, it takes 7 months just to get there if you're on a good rotation, and then how long you're there, and then the whole trip back, and you don't have that many people. So personal entertainment actually becomes a really important thing for off hours. Other than that, I think I'd have to bring some good spices because I feel like you wouldn't be able to get very many spices there. And I don't know, pictures, lots of pictures of my family, because unless we're talking about 30 years from now and they're sending families up there, I think I would miss my loved ones. So
yeah, thank you. Emily is asking, do you think if you are pro motion sickness, that being an astronaut would be a terrible idea?
Yes. So I almost put the video in, but I was, what do you call it? I didn't want to have too many videos, but one of the things that you do at Space Camp is you go into this, they call it the MAT. It's the multi-axis trainer. So it's one of these, there's a circle, and then there's another circle, and then there's another circle. So you're moving all around in different ways. And in theory, this is how they used to train the astronauts that would go up in like the little capsules, the Apollos and the Gemini, especially the Geminis, to what would happen if you went into, this crazy orbit. But having done that, and I know that there were people there that had motion sickness, I can say it's a terrible idea. And I think even people that don't get motion sickness, usually when they go up to the International Space Station and they're in zero gravity, they're sick for at least 6 or 7 hours. It's very nauseous, so not a good idea.
Okay, thank you. So another question. Now, as we're safely down on surface, what does it mean to NASA and to its future plans, or to all of us, this landing of Perseverance Rover on Mars?
That's a great question. So part of what Perseverance is doing is it's paving the way for humans to Mars. So the ultimate goal is to have human missions. And so a lot of the science that Perseverance is doing, and there's a great information on the NASA website about all the different instruments and what the purposes are. But part of what they are looking at is what resources are on Mars that can help humans to survive when we get there. So Perseverance is both looking for the secrets of ancient life, but also looking forward. So it's a really interesting mission because it's rare that you have one that's looking both backwards and forwards. But that is indeed what this mission is doing.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Yeah. All right, let me see what other questions we... Okay, I think we have people joining us from the University of Oriental Studies. They sending us their hello.
Bree and I will talk about space next week at work. It's always good to have another aficionado.
So next question. How is this landing different from the previous ones?
I think this one is not too different than the last landing, which was InSight. But I think that I can't remember which rover it was. NASA they don't have a perfect track record. Actually, none of the countries sending rovers, both to the moon, and also there have been some recent attempts to Mars, or to the moon and to Mars, that have not necessarily gone well. And it actually fits well with Emily's next question. What kind of math does one need to study to become an astronaut? And the answer is the metric system, because I think one of NASA's rovers that really I don't remember the exact details of what happened, but I remember reading that there was, because in the United States we use this US standard system and the rest of the world uses the metric system, that someone had used the wrong math. So step one, use the metric system, and NASA is very good about that. But also, I think other than that, every single rover landing that we have, the technology just gets a little bit better. So I think folks were nervous that it was going to fail, but they were less nervous because they have more experience, and like anything in life, the more you do something, the better you get. So this particular landing was still very stressful, but maybe a little bit less so than the last one.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Next question from Nader Siddiqov. She's asking, is NASA going to share its findings about Mars with private space companies such as SpaceX?
So the interesting thing is, I think NASA is the U.S. government agency that manages the space program, but these private companies are truly working together with NASA. In fact, the recent launch that we had from Florida, and it was the first one since the space shuttle, it was actually SpaceX Crew Dragon that was launched. It wasn't the NASA SLS, which is the other rocket that's coming. And actually, I just realized I could have been showing pictures behind me of all these rockets, but it's not. It was actually SpaceX that was doing it. So the answer is absolutely. I think NASA is a civilian agency. They approach this as a way and a means for humans to explore, the solar system and the world beyond, our own atmosphere here on Earth, and that now, in a way that it didn't used to, really does have a lot of partnerships with private companies like SpaceX and Blue Horizons.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know the answer to this question. How much does it cost to accomplish mission to Mars?
So much. I really don't. I have no idea. And one of the things they teach you when you become a diplomat is you should not answer a question that you don't know the answer to. So I'm very sorry, Shaknoza, but I don't know the answer. But I bet if you did some research, you could probably find out online. I'm sure that that's cited in some of the fascinating articles that are out there about the Perseverance.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sandy, thank you so much. Time flew so fast. It was such an interesting presentation, and thanks for taking the time to answer the questions too. It was very, very interesting.
Oh, thank you very much, Gulshan, I appreciate having the opportunity to do this, and today of all days. And I just want to encourage everybody that is listening to please don't hesitate to, look up whether it's just trying out NASA TV and just to see. Sometimes it's quite relaxing. It's just the International Space Station, and you can just watch the view as it goes around the Earth every 90 minutes. And it's just a nice thing to have on in the background. It's very peaceful. But no matter what, I think I just encourage people to think about space in new and different ways, and know that just because you are not good at math or not a science expert, that you can still find a lot of enjoyment and excitement in the topic of space.
Yeah, and we'll use the resources you have shared to explore this topic.
Excellent. Wonderful.
And I want to thank all our viewers today for wonderful questions. And please don't forget to join us next Friday, same time, 6 p.m. Tashkent time, as we're going to have Veronica Williams talking about plant-based diets. So thanks so much and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.